All right, let's go. Welcome friends in the room in Dallas. Those who braved all the crazy traffic in the last couple days, and friends in El Paso, Fayetteville, Phoenix, Austin, Houston, go Stros, and wherever you are joining and listening in. As we continue this series, Rated R for Romance. I'm gonna start by telling a little bit of a story. A couple years ago, went to the doctor for my annual physical, and which is always an interesting experience, and got there and had that experience where the doctor tells you, hey, step on the scale, we're just gonna check, and it's kind of that moment of truth, and you step up there, and it was like a scene from Heavyweights came back, because he was like, step on the scale, okay, wait, step back on the scale here for just a second, and he looked at the number, and then he looked down at his paper, and he goes, you know, the last 2 times you've come in, you've put on like 10 pounds each time, let's talk about your weight. It's like, let's talk about your weight. It's called muscle, is what it is, and it was not at all the case. And it was one of those scenarios where he was like, hey, you know, tell me exercise and what are you doing? And it's like, look, dude, we got little kids. It's a little hard to find time to exercise right now. I just prefer wearing bigger shirts. And so that's my offense right now. And he began to walk through, you know, it's important staying in shape and getting in shape. So that led me to like, man, I need to get back in shape and begin to do that. And there's that experience where if you have been out of shape before, probably you have, you go back into the gym or you go back to running or doing things that you've done before, and what seemed at some point in the past to be easy and you could lift that weight or you could, you know, run a mile, all of a sudden becomes like, oh my gosh, what has happened to me? How did I get so out of shape? And the answer for all of us is pretty elementary or pretty simple, right? Like if someone came up to you and they were like, hey, I got out of shape, I don't know how, you would say, well, have you been exercising? Have you been eating? You would immediately connect the dots. There's no mystery in your mind or mystery in any of our minds anytime we find ourselves no longer in shape. And the reason I start there is tonight we are continuing this look at Song of Solomon as it relates to the idea of love and romance and everything that God has to say. And we have an expression as it relates to love that someone will fall in love with another person. And there's also an increasingly popular expression that people will cite even as a reason for divorce, that I fell out of love. I'm no longer in love. What does that have to do with like in shape and all that? Well, in the same way that I would say like, hey, I'm not in shape, you would say, well, I know how that happened or how you got there and how you get back in shape. And yet people don't make the same connection when it comes to love. When someone says, hey, we were in love and we were married, and then they end up saying, you know, we're just not in love anymore, most of us don't connect the dots that just like being in shape, you do certain things to stay in shape. There are certain things biblically, it says you do to stay in love. That just like in that scenario, you would exercise and you would eat right, and that's what you do in shape. The Bible says there are things that you don't just stay in love in neutral. There are things that you do to stay in love. It is easy to fall in love. All you gotta have is a pulse and a person. You got it, you can fall in love. But it takes certain things in order to stay in love. And I know in the room, you're like, that's crazy right now, not us, baby, we're gonna be in love for whatever. No matter what happens, we got this. No, you don't. And there are certain things that are characteristics that you need to know. But here's what the world will tell you. They're like, hey, if you fell out of love, you probably were never in real love to begin with. And it is not true. Generally, almost every scenario, in fact, not even almost, every scenario where someone says we were in love, and 50% of marriages are this way. Like people generally don't just go like, hey, we're getting married on a whim, you know, she was there, and I was like, hey, what are you doing? Let's get married. They generally get married when they're like, man, I love this person. And then in a short time later, they're standing in front of the person sometimes they've had children with, and they say, I don't love you. I don't want any part of you in my life. And I had fallen in love, but I'm no longer in love with you. But most of us don't connect the dots that there are certain reasons why that is the case. So tonight, we're gonna explore the more difficult of the two. Falling in love is easy. Staying in love requires certain things. And biblically, there are things that we're given all throughout the Bible. But specifically in Song of Solomon, which is the book that we've been in, there are things that are laid out that are a part of if you're gonna have a love story that lasts, we'll be there. So if you take notes, you can just write out, hey, staying in love, here's 3 things that are involved every time a relationship stays in love. So I don't know if you're dating, if you're engaged, if you're married, wherever you are in the room, if you hope to have a relationship that lasts someday, these are things that are going to be a part of any healthy marriage. Regardless, really, even of what you believe in terms of faith, though that's probably, not even probably, is more important than any marriage you're gonna have. But if you're gonna have any type of relationship and love that lasts, these are going to be a part of each of them. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna start in chapter 6, verse 13 of Song of Solomon, and we're gonna read through the text, and then I'm gonna give 3 takeaways. Song of Solomon, if you're just joining us, rated R for romance, is because we named it that because this series, unlike maybe any series we've ever done, is a look at a book that is very rated R. What do I mean by that? Why do I say that? The book of Song of Solomon was so erotic that young Hebrew boys and girls were not allowed to read the book until they were 30 or married. Think about that. If you're under the age of 30 and you're an Orthodox Jew still, and you're not married, you can't read it. This means in Solomon's day, when people were like, and they weren't sneaking in Playboy, they're like pulling in the Song of Solomon as a teenager into their tent while they're living. They're like, dude, oh my gosh. And you may have come in thinking, man, God is not about sexuality. He's not about intimacy in marriage. He's not about romance. God invented all of that. And he is very pro that. So we've been exploring that inside of this book, but he's for that in the context of marriage. So far, to catch you up, we looked at chapters 1 through 6, where we saw the attraction stage. Then we saw the dating or kind of the courtship as they're getting to know each other and moving towards marriage. Then we saw engagement and the honeymoon night, and it was steamy. And then we moved into conflict, which is a part of any healthy relationship. And tonight, we are going to explore what it looks like to stay in love. Let me just preface this. If there, by chance, are any children here, which there shouldn't be, but if there are, this would be a good time to go get a snow cone or something, because this chapter has been named by scholars the most erotic section, not just in this book, but in all of the Bible. So it is about to get real, people. And I will start in verse 13, and you'll see exactly kind of what I mean by that, and we'll read through the exchange that these two people have in this relationship. One last thing, in case, again, you are joining us, Song of Solomon is a song between a guy and a girl, and they kind of go back and forth between one another. Every now and then, like, their friends chime in, but think Romeo and Juliet, if you will, as they just sing back and forth to one another. So verse 13, the guy speaking says this: turn, O turn to his lady, O perfect one. This is after they're married, after a little bit of time has gone by and they're no longer newlyweds, and they're just continuing to deepen in relationship. This section we're looking at, he starts with him saying, hey, turn, turn, O perfect one, turn that I may stare at you. Not a great pickup line, gentlemen, for a girl that you're just meeting, but appropriate in marriage. So he's like, hey, girl, let me look at you. Girl, you are so fine. That's where he's beginning. The next verse. She says, why do you gaze upon the perfect one like the dance of Mahanaim? Mahanaim, virtually every theologian in studying this week says that she is now, the dance of Mahanaim is something that she's now engaging in, where she is dancing seductively before her husband. This is like a striptease, if you will, that she is doing, or at least a naked dance in front of her husband, and he's about to praise all of her body. Way before that's what the next verses are, of him laying out, you got this, and girl, you got this. Way before John Mayer came up with Your Body is a Wonderland, Solomon was going, hey, I love the way your hair falls to your hips. And here's what he says, verse 1, as she dances in front of him. How beautiful are your feet, your sandaled feet, O nobleman's daughter. The curves of your thighs, or your hips, your translation may have, are like jewels. The work and the hands of a master craftsman. Girl, I like your legs and your hips. Shakira, Shakira. Your navel is a round mixing bowl. May it never lack mixed wine. This word navel is translated in one of two ways. Either belly button, which most scholars don't think makes sense because he talks about her belly next, or her vagina. And virtually every scholar that I read said that's what he is saying here. Let's keep moving. Okay, your belly is like a mound of wheat encircled by the lilies. Not always the best compliment to give a lady. You got a wheat belly. That's what you got. Here's what he's saying. He's likely talking about the color of it, like wheat would be bound together in the shape and the color of it. And he's saying it's like this bronze tanned stomach that smells good, encircled by lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower made of ivory, this slender neck. Your eyes are like the pools of Heshbon by the gate of Bath Rabban. Heshbon was just a city known for its beautiful and calm pools. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon overlooking Damascus. Again, probably not the compliment that I would give, but dude, Solomon's a nose guy, man. Okay, your head crowns you like Mount Carmel, which was the most beautiful place that sat atop all of Palestine. The locks of your hair are like royal tapestries. The king is held captive in its tresses. How beautiful you are, how lovely, O love, with all of your delights. Your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like clusters of grapes. I want to climb that palm tree and take hold of its fruit stalks. I don't know if I even need to explain that verse. May your breasts be like the clusters of grapes, and the fragrance of your breath be like apricots. May your mouth be like the fine or best wine, flowing smoothly for my beloved, gliding gently over our lips as we sleep or make love together. So he goes through, he praises her from her feet to her head, shoulders, knees, and toes. These are all the things that I love about you. And he just praises her as she dances seductively in front of him. And in response, she said, I am my beloved's and his desire, and he desires me. The word desire, you may feel like, oh, she said that before. That is the only time, other than in Genesis chapter 3, that word is used in all of the Bible. The other time it was used was with Cain, if you know the story of Cain and Abel, and God shows up to Cain and basically is like, hey, sin's desire is to consume you. And she uses that word here and says, hey, I am my husband's, and dude, there's no mistaking this man. He loves his lady, and he wants to be all up in this and climb that palm tree. So she's just a confidence, security, as they move intimately towards one another, and they're making love together. And then we're told a scene happens shortly after that. The next scene is of them sitting in the palace, and the wife basically saying, hey, here's what I want to do. I've planned a getaway. So next scene, verse 11. Come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside and let us spend the night in the villages. Let's go out to a bed and breakfast. Let's get away from all the hustle and bustle of town and all the work and all the responsibilities. Let's go away from the city. Let us rise early in the morning and go to the vineyards and see if the vines have budded. See if their blossoms have opened and if the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. So she further uses euphemism and says, hey, let's get out of the city and let's go make love in the outdoors. Verse 13, the mandrakes send out their fragrance. Over our door is every delicacy, both new and old. Here's what mandrakes was. Mandrakes was an aphrodisiac inside the Bible. And so there's another occasion where in the Bible, there's these two women who fight over giving mandrakes, Rachel and Leah, to Jacob, because they knew it was a form of arousal. It was associated with that. There was a belief that in eating them, it would just be arousing. So basically what she's saying is like, hey, let's get out of town. I'm gonna put on Usher, whatever song you want, boo. And the mood is set, the candles have been lit, the mandrakes are in season. And over our door is every delicacy, both new and old, which I have stored up for you, my lover. So she says, let's get out, let's make love. And I got some old things I know you like, and I got some new things we're gonna try out. Now you know why it's been called the most erotic section in the Bible. Verse 1 of chapter 8, we're then told of the next scene where she's just reflecting on her husband. It says this, oh, how I wish you were my little brother. Which feels like a curveball, left turn. Nursing at my mother's breasts, which doesn't make it any better. If I saw you outside, I could kiss you, and surely no one would despise me. What is she saying there? Hey, basically she's saying in this time in Israel, it was inappropriate for husband and wife to show public displays of affection. That if you were out in the open, you were not to kiss the person you're married to. That seems bizarre to us. It was a cultural thing at that time, but it would be appropriate to kiss someone of your own family or to kiss a sibling that was around you. So she's basically saying, man, I wish that you were my brother so that at any point I could display affection to you. The social norms of what is appropriate are too constraining for me and how much I love you, would be another way of saying that. Verse 2, I would lead you into my mother's house, the one who taught me. There I would give you spiced wine to drink and the nectar of my pomegranates, talking about sex. His left hand caresses my head. His right hand stimulates me. It is hot and heavy, And then she takes this turn as though she's very intentionally bringing up something she said 3 different times in the book. I admonish you, O maidens of Jerusalem, or unmarried women, do not arouse or awaken love until it pleases. So everything's like, clearly there, passionate exchange, sexual intimacy is taking place. In the midst of all of that, it's as though she pauses and go, hey, do not introduce sex or intimacy and passion until the right time, until marriage. Despite all of the freedom that they show together with one another in their relationship, it's as though she pauses and it's like, this is amazing. Don't introduce it until you get married. This is a couple that prioritizes one another. They pursue each other sexually. They do all types of things. And 3 takeaways that I want to look at from their relationship just really quickly as it looks like, or as it relates to staying in love. How did they keep the romance and the fire of their love burning hot when it likely was years later that this relationship, or they're reflecting on their time together? They're not newlyweds at this point. And so there's 3 takeaways that would be a part of any relationship that are always involved in love that lasts, or in staying in love, not falling in love, and staying in love. The first one is this: staying in love always involves work. It always involves work. The reason this is so important is there's this myth out there, and I know most of you on the surface, you're like, oh no, I wouldn't believe that, that's crazy. And many of you have bought it, that if I can just find the right person, if I just find the one out there, kind of the soulmate, the one that was made for me, then it's really gonna be easy. We're gonna have our ups and downs, life has those, but for the most part, it's not gonna be that much work. It's just kind of gonna go naturally and everything's gonna work out well for us. And the Bible says that is just not true. Paul even says in 1 Corinthians 7 that if you get married, you need to know it is going to bring trouble into your life. And I want to spare you of that. It is going to be hard, it is amazing, and there is work always involved. If you want to stay in love, it will always involve work. And just because things get challenging in someone's marriage, or they find themselves in a hard time, does not mean that they should not be in a marriage with that person. Staying in love will always include work. People will often think that, hey, man, whenever it gets hard, it just shouldn't be like this. I think, they just weren't the one for me. Or maybe we were never really, truly in love. And that is a flawed way of thinking. The Bible says the way that you keep romance, or the way that romance stays in a relationship, includes work, pursuing each other, sacrificing, communicating with one another, working through conflict together, as they did in the last chapter there. It's as though God says this is a gift, marriage, which it is, that requires work every time. It's like in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 22, it says this: the one who finds a wife finds what is enjoyable, or a good thing, and receives a pleasurable gift from the Lord. It is a gift that comes with work in order to make it work. It is a gift that comes with work in order to make it work. So in other words, if you're gonna have a marriage that lasts someday, you need to know it is gonna require work. It is gonna require you and the other person being committed. We are in this, we're gonna work through, we're gonna grow together, we're gonna sacrifice and serve one another, put each other's desires and needs in front of our own, and continue to care first for the other person above ourselves. It's gonna require work and work. This incredible gift, God says, that I'm giving to people will also be a gift that comes with it some work. Because there isn't, you're like, hey, I'm just looking for the most compatible person. There has never been a wedding in the history of history that involves 2 people who are compatible. Because you have 2 sinners who at some times in their life are gonna be incompatible, not just with you, but with humanity. And so there has never been some occasion where it's like, man, if you just find the most perfect compatible person, you are looking for a unicorn that is out there. It is a gift that involves work every single time. It's like this. I recently had a friend that offered to give me a suit. They worked, her and her husband were like, hey, we're gonna give you a suit. They work at this clothing line, and they knew that I'd had like multiple suits that because of my opening illustration, 2 times that I was getting into the car, they ripped, and I was like, I gotta go to the tailor again on the dance floor, getting after it, and they just ripped. And so they knew, hey, we gotta get you a new suit. So they called me, came out to their shop, they're like, man, let me take you over to the warehouse. I get into the warehouse, they say, every single one of these suits, and almost as big as this section. There was suit after suit after suit, and they got black and red and every color that you would imagine, and blue and gray and everything. They were like, hey, you pick any of them. And that will be our gift to you. But you need to know these are all returns, and they've all been formed and shaped in a bunch of different, people's height and size and weight. So no matter which one you choose, and you can pick any of them, it's gonna require work to make it work. In the same way, In other words, it's gonna require you taking that suit and taking it to a tailor because it's too big here, it's too long in the pants, or it's too big in the waist or in the jacket. It's gonna require this free gift, or this gift to you will require some work and tailoring in order to make it work. No matter who you choose, if you're dating somebody, or if you ever date somebody, here's what you need to know. They are not gonna be the perfect person that you complete together and it's like, hey, this is gonna be easy all the time. It is going to require tremendous work in order to keep the relationship and the love in that relationship alive. Through communication, dealing through conflict, prioritizing each other. It's gonna require work. And here's like the truth. Like guys, just like I was like, hey, any of these suits you could pick and all of them are gonna require some sort of tailoring. If you're a believer in the room, and there's a believer who's a girl in the room or anywhere, you could pick really any of the suits or the suitors out there and you could make it work if you're willing to do the work. And you're gonna have to do the work in order to make any relationship work. Does that make sense? So you can pick any of them, just like in that scenario, I'll pick any of these and they're gonna require some tailoring. I don't care, and girls, I don't care who you pick, as handsome and as great as he seems like he is, you're gonna find out soon, especially if you marry him, that this brother needs some work and you have to be willing to do the work. That's really the question of marriage. It's not like, will it be hard? It's gonna be hard. And it is the most amazing gift, but it will only work for those who are willing to do the work. Love always requires work. So here's the last thing I'll say about this point. What this means is that looking for the most compatible person for you is a foolish thing to spend your time doing. One, because no matter who it is, they're gonna be incompatible. At some level, in some way, they're gonna be incompatible with you. You're kind of just picking your problems, just like picking the suit pants. Do I want too long or do I want, doesn't matter, I've gotta do work either way. And the second reason why it's foolish to look for the most compatible person is this. I'm gonna pop somebody's bubble. You're never gonna find them. Why do I say that? You're like, bring it on, I'm American, I'm gonna prove you wrong. No, you're not. Here's why. Because in our generation, or in society right now, if you're between the ages of 20 and 35, here's what you need to know. There's about 70 million of you in America. So let's assume there's about 70 million options for you in America. Maybe you're like, dude, I'll date a 50-year-old. Great, you do you. Either way, there's about 70 million of people on 10 years either side of you in America. Of the opposite sex, there's about 35 million. I think they've even got slides, so there you go. Now we're down to 35 million. That's the potential people likely that you're gonna get married to. And then inside of that, statistically, there's about 12 million who are Christians. That feels a little generous of people who are actually following Jesus, but let's go with it. And then inside of that group of 12 million people of the opposite sex, 10 years either side of you, then you gotta go, well, let's be honest. Who am I attracted to? And probably not all 12 million. So let's whittle that down because I'm probably a 9, so I'm looking for a 9. And so that's gonna be roughly 3 million maybe, depending on your standard out there, 3 million people that could be viable options for you. Now, let's assume you could get in contact with all of them. Because in order to find the most compatible person for you, you have to evaluate every single one of them. In order to find the most, the best orange at the grocery store, I have to pick up every single orange and evaluate every single one of them, or else I can't know, did I get the right orange or get the best orange out there? In order for you to know, I have got the most compatible person option that I have out there. You have got to spend time and evaluate every single one of them. Now, if you did speed dating with all 3 million of them, that would take roughly 15 million minutes, which would be the equivalent of 57 years. If you do it 12 hours a day and you're a go-getter, you would be 82 years old if you're 25. So point being, let me hammer it home because you're like, no, it still could find me. No, you won't. You're not gonna find the most compatible person out there. You're gonna marry someone who is not as compatible as somebody else could be for you. And as long as you hide behind, I'm still searching for like the most compatible person. You are searching for a leprechaun and a unicorn. That might as well be your task out there because you are not gonna find them. So you can't find the most compatible, but you can find someone, listen to me very closely, with the qualities that God says matter most. Qualities of character. If you're a guy, I want you to write down 1 Peter chapter 3 and Titus chapter 2. And I want you to go read the qualities of the type of godly woman that you should have. Or Proverbs 31. If you're a girl, you should be looking for a guy that God says is the type of man that he would let lead his bride, the church. And those are laid out in 1 Peter chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1. You will not find the most compatible. You're not even gonna find the most attractive. I hate to burst your bubble. Even if you boiled it down and you're like, I don't need that long. It's like Tinder version, just 60 seconds a person, you could do it. It's gonna take you 15 years. And so looking for like the most, attractive or most compatible is not an option, but finding someone with the qualities God says matter most is. And regardless of who you pick, they are going to be incompatible for you. And it's going to require work to keep staying in love together and working through and growing. Okay, so the second quality that we see is that staying in love requires and involves serving. Just like this couple worked to care for the relationship, they prioritized one another, they got out of town, they pursued each other sexually, they cared for one another's needs, they worked through conflict, we're told in chapter 4. They also, over and over again, served one another. If you're gonna be in a relationship or have a love that stays, if you're gonna stay in love, it doesn't happen in neutral. You can fall in love, but it requires being intentional to stay in love. And if you're gonna stay in love, the second thing it always involves is serving the other person. Here's why this is important. Underneath a lot of the reasons why a lot of us wanna get married is the assumption that I'm gonna get married and this person is gonna meet my needs. I'm gonna show up, I'm gonna come home from working a long day and she's gonna be standing there in lingerie with the laundry done and cooking dinner and like, oh man, it's time for sex again 3 more times before we hit bed, and that is not gonna happen. And it's kind of this like, oh, this person is kind of there to be the fulfillment or the meter of my needs. Or the girl, you have the opposite thing where you're like, he's gonna come home, we're just gonna sit there, stare in each other's eyes, light candles, and just talk about our day. And he's gonna be like, honey, you need another massage. Go, you work so hard. And it's not gonna happen. And you need to enter into marriage, and here's how you can know that you're ready to get married. When you're at a place where you're like, I do not see this as an opportunity for them to serve me. I want to serve them for the rest of my life. And there's gonna be moments in all of us and everyone who gets married where it's selfish and there's sinful parts of my heart that don't want to serve. But if you're gonna enter into a covenant, you need to go in thinking that, hey, I'm in this to not get anything out but to give towards this person. I'm not about what I can take, what I can get. I'm about what I can give, because staying in love involves serving the other person. And the beautiful thing is when two people who love Jesus come together and both of them are committed to serving the other person. And it's like, no, I'm here to serve you. No, I'm here to serve you. No, I'm here to serve you. And it just goes back and forth between one another. And it's the way God intended marriage to be. In Ephesians chapter 5, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That if you're gonna have a love that stays, it is gonna involve serving one another. They served one another. How did she do it? She dances naked in front of her husband. My guess is this wasn't something that she was like, oh, this is just what I do every Tuesday. She was committed to serving her husband. Am I saying that that's like the application you should take away in your marriage someday? I don't know, you do you. But point being, she was serving her husband. The other ways that she served is she planned a weekend to get out of town. All throughout the book, we're told that she initiates, she pursues, and she praises her husband. She tells us that she has brought creativity into the bedroom to serve her husband. He serves her by consistently communicating and working through conflict, by praising her and going over and creating a safe place to care for her, saying, this is who you are to me, driving clarity into the relationship. They served one another over and over and over again. He made clear that the standard of beauty for him was his wife. And if you get married, and guys, this probably goes without saying, but just in case it doesn't, when you get married, when you decide, I'm gonna say I do, that woman now is your standard of beauty. If you get married and she's a blonde, you like blondes. If you get married and she's a brunette, you like brunettes. If you get married and she's tall, you're into tall. If you get married and she's short, you're into short. If you get married and she's thin, you're into thin. If you get married and she was formerly thin, you're into formerly thin. Whatever the characteristics, she is now the quality and characteristic of what beauty is to you. And your role is to go, man, God, I wanna feed anything, not right now, because you're single, or unless you're married, I wanna feed anything that just allows me to continue to see my wife is the epitome of beauty. And whatever changes and whatever happens to her body, she is my standard of what beauty is. I'm gonna feed that attraction in her, and I'm gonna starve anything that competes with that. This is why pornography is so dangerous, because it disrupts that. It begins to feed you, hey, you know what you need? It's not her, you need variety. You need, blonde here, brunette here, you need plastic. Same thing with women. Pornography does the same thing to both. And the goal now, just like the goal in marriage, is to starve anything that competes, whether it's just a glancing at a woman in the office who bends over and you're tempted to take a double take, or it's pornography. I cannot recommend if pornography, which is a large struggle for many people in the room, is a part of your story, or currently, if pornography has been something you looked at in the last week, getting Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes is a software and app that goes on your phone. I've spent hundreds of dollars over the last decade, and they're some of the best money that I've ever spent. It's like $9.99 a month. This is becoming an ad for Covenant Eyes. But putting it on your phone so that you can have people in your life who can hold you accountable, sends an email to other people that help hold you accountable to, hey, what were you searching and feeding your heart? For him, we're not told that she had done all types of exercise. If it had been a few years, maybe they had kids, there's stretch marks, and he goes, you are the standard of beauty. I love everything about you. Even that nose like a tower, I'm into tower noses. I love it. That's what he says. And the same thing is true women, for the men in your life, that you're gonna end up married to a guy, and hair is gonna go from here to back here, and they're gonna have changes to their body, and that guy is the standard of beauty or standard of attraction for you, and you can come alongside of him, and you can do what very few wives do, which is what she does all throughout the book. You can praise him and praise the qualities that you wanna see grow in him, and they'll grow. Or you can starve them and think, well, he didn't deserve it, and he didn't need that type of encouragement, and he needs to do more for me, and they won't grow. There was a guy, a pastor on our staff, who said that if you, in getting married, treat your husband as a loser, he will be a loser. And if you treat him as a king, he'll be a king. And some of the words that you use are the most powerful things to a future husband that you're gonna have. But she comes alongside, she serves, they serve, and they devote themselves to caring for one another. So how do I know that I'm marrying someone or moving towards a relationship with someone who's gonna be a servant lover, not a selfish lover? Because guys, oh man, this is so huge. Listen back in case you're losing it and you're looking at the Astros game or counting these things over here. Marrying someone who's hot, who's selfish, is gonna make for a relationship that you don't wanna be in. I've seen it just too many times with the guy. I can think of names and people just haven't done this the last 10 years, and they married someone and she's so hot and she's over there and she's got all types of cosmetic work done everywhere, and you're like, man, she was a former model, but she's so selfish, and the relationship and the intimacy that they experience in marriage pales in comparison to someone else who doesn't look quite like the supermodel, and she's beautiful, this other person, but they're a servant of Jesus, and they give themselves to their husband, and they care for their husband, and they encourage their husband, and they talk about their husband in a positive way when they're in public. And they experience a relationship and an intimacy like it just doesn't matter as much as you're like, dude, but her being hot really matters. It really doesn't. When it comes down to the relationship that you want to have, if it comes at the cost of her being a servant lover. How can you know they're gonna be a servant lover? If they're following Jesus and they're committed to their life following Jesus, who said he is a servant king and anyone who follows him will serve. Ephesians chapter 5, Paul even commands it, or the Bible commands, husbands, serve your wife, lay down your life for her. Your needs, and put everything that you want, everything from like, hey, the temperature in the room. My wife thinks it's hot, I think it's freezing. And we'll move in the direction of compromise, which means we keep it at whatever she wants. This is the type of thing that you're gonna have. And the goal is mutual, back and forth, where you're serving and caring and loving for one another. Are you in a relationship with someone who's a servant? Because I know if you're dating him, you're probably like, they're attractive. Are they a servant? Will they be a servant? Are they following Jesus right now? There's a cliche triangle that really captures the essence of how you can know your relationship is gonna grow together, where it just puts this idea of here's how you can know that you and him are gonna move towards one another. The further that you move in the direction of God, the further that you are gonna move in the direction of one another, and the opposite is true. The further that you move distance from God, the further you're gonna move in distance from one another. So here's the question I have for you if you're dating. Where or what direction are you and the person that you're dating moving on that triangle? Are they moving closer to God? Are you moving closer to God? If so, man, that's a great thing, and you should be really encouraged to be like, this is only gonna hopefully get better and better and better. Or are they, be honest, moving further away from God, even if you're moving closer? And if so, you should be concerned. The third quality that is involved anytime someone stays in love is this. Staying in love involves sexually pursuing each other. Now hold on, because people are about, wait a second. Over and over throughout this book, we're given example after example of them pursuing each other sexually. I mean, dude, it gets hot and bothered, from a striptease to oral sex to just like them having sex out in the woods. It's like, good grief. Oh man, I'm so uncomfortable reading this right now. But they had this sexual intimacy where they pursued and they cared and they prioritized one another. Do you know, in case you're like, oh, that's kind of a leap, the Bible in another place commands husbands, your sexual rights are not your own. Wives, your sexual rights are not your own. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it commands, in case you're like, wait, really? In order to have love that lasts, you have to have sex involved? Yes. A husband should give to his wife her sexual rights. And likewise, a wife to her husband. It's not the wife who has the rights over her own body, but the husband. In the same way, it's not the husband who has the rights to his own body, but the wife. Do not deprive each other except for by mutual agreement for a specified time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Now Paul says, the only circumstances under which you should reject one another is if you're spending time in prayer. Which, side note guys, if you get married someday and you're excited about moving forward, hopefully that night, getting lucky, I would not introduce this idea of like, hey, well, we're not? Is this a prayer night? Is that what this is? Has never gone well for me in the experience of our relationship. But Paul would say, and I'm playing clearly, but Paul would say, hey, do not deprive one another sexually in marriage. Your rights are no longer your own, and his rights are no longer his own. That you're to give yourselves to one another. It is commanded. And every time that love lasts over and over, and there's so many psychological studies, even the secular world outside of anything related to church says, is that love that lasts involves pursuing and caring for one another sexually. And there's gonna be extreme scenarios where somebody gets sick, or there's seasons of life where that's not possible. But by and large, most of the sexless marriages in America, and there's about 25% that are not because of somebody in some crazy tragedy or accident. They're because they didn't pursue one another, and all of a sudden that flame just went cold. Sexual intimacy will always involve that. Here's what you need to know though. The temptation here is gonna be to think, well, in order for that to, remain red hot, I need to introduce sex, and I need to make sure that I'm on the same page sexually with that other person. So like in dating, I need to make sure like our expectations are the same, we're sexually compatible, we have the same kind of chemistry, because I don't want to get in marriage, and that's a big part of marriage clearly, and I don't want to get in there and be like, oh, we're just totally off the same page, and I really have a high sex drive, and they're just not as kinky as I'd like. I'm like, let's do role play, cops and robbers, and they're just not into that, and so we need to figure that out before we get married. Here's why that's a bad idea. Here's why. A couple of reasons. One, all of your sexual drive and sexual desires and all that stuff is gonna change. Different seasons of your life, after she has kids, or during the time where it's immediately after a child is born, there's this long, dark winter where it just won't look like that. There's different seasons where the body's gonna change, where hormones, where all kinds of stuff, whatever sexual drive that you have, it's not going to look that same. So whatever you're like, oh, we're on the same page. And 6 months into marriage, not on the same page anymore. So it's a foolish thing to make sure that we're on the same page. Secondly, it's foolish because the best chance you have of making sure we're sexually on the same page is by pursuing not sex before marriage, but a servant lover who's gonna be like, I'm going to move in the direction of the things that sexually are gonna serve my husband or serve my wife together. Not getting on the same page about, we're both into the same stuff before you get married. And the biggest reason why it's such a bad idea is sex is this powerful thing, and I know we've talked a lot about it in this series, but you've gotta hear me. Sex was given by God, and it does two things every time. It blinds and it binds. It binds you together, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6, and that it glues you. He writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, there were these dudes inside of the church who didn't really realize this, and they're hanging out, and they're like, yeah, we're married, but we also go down to the temple every now and then because our wives' sex drive are not the same, and we have sex with these prostitutes, which feels like, Christianity 101, don't do. But Paul writes, and he says, don't you know every time you have sex with a prostitute, you are gluing yourself to her? That's what sex does. It binds you to that other person, where there's always an exchange of them taking part of you and you taking part of them, because it's so much more than physical. Sex not only binds you together, it also blinds you. In Proverbs chapter 5, it says that love, let me see if I even have it, that love is intoxicating. It says basically, hey, you should let your wife and the wife of your youth and her breasts satisfy you at all times. Let you always be intoxicated in her love. Let you always be drunk in love or always drunk in sex. Long before Beyonce said it, Solomon said it. And here's why you need to know that. Sex, anytime you introduce it, it's blinding your inhibitions. It's binding you to that person and blinding you to their flaws. That is incredibly important and powerful in marriage because it allows you to overlook small offenses. You're coming back together and unifying. Incredibly dangerous, though, is sex in the context of dating because the dude is throwing all kinds of red flags out there that you should be seeing, but because you're intoxicated or drunk, you're not able to see them as clearly. You're dating after having a few glasses of wine and you're like, yeah, he seems great. And it's like, he doesn't speak English. And that would be nuts, you would think. In the same way, that is essentially what the Bible says. Is like anytime you introduce sex, you can't think clearly. Because that's the point of sex. It binds you and it blinds you. And you are setting yourself up to make one of the most important decisions of your life, buzzed and intoxicated. And this incredible gift that God has given. So that's the reason why trying before you buy and all of that nonsense is not just nonsense, it is incredibly destructive and incredibly dangerous. And some of you have stayed in relationships way too long because you have sexually gone farther than you ever thought that you would, and you feel like, we've already gone there. I feel like, we might as well just keep moving forward, and you need to break up. And if you're like, no, it's not important, we can go without sex, go without sex. You know that you can rightly evaluate the relationship and whether or not it should continue moving forward. The second reason why, pursuing a relationship just because sexual intimacy, or even prioritizing that, like, is the sex gonna be really good? Are we kind of into all the same stuff? Is such a foolish thing because you know the percentage of time that you're gonna spend in marriage and sex? Like it's crazy. It's like less than 1%. In other words, you're gonna spend most of life, and most of marriage is not just like sex and sex and sex. It's less than 1% on a good day. What do I mean by that? Okay, so here's some of the numbers. The average person is gonna spend, I even went above average. In a given year, if you had sex 4 times a week for 30 minutes each time, you will spend 1% of that year having sex in marriage. That means 99% of the time that you're spending with that person not doing sex. And maybe you're out there like, hey, 4 times a week, not us, we're doing 7. That's what we're going. No, you're not, but let's give it to you. You know what the statistic would be there? 2%. Why would you make a decision based on 2% of what you're actually gonna do in marriage? And really, let's be honest, dude, if it's really that important to make sure like she's good in bed or he's good in bed, think about what you're telling yourself there. You're telling, I want somebody who has had so much sex outside of marriage that they're amazing at this act because they've had so many other sexual partners. And if that's a part of your story and wherever you're at, man, God can heal and work in the midst of all of that. But the idea of like, man, she's a lady in the street, freak of the bed, and she's a virgin, and that doesn't exist. And you're prioritizing something that is so small, that it's so destructive. And it's such a foolish thing to bank a relationship surviving and a relationship on. But staying in love in marriage involves sexually pursuing one another. Where is the line sexually of what you can do? This is where having a servant lover and being together and saying, man, I want to care for you and I want to prioritize you and I don't want to do anything that is uncomfortable with you. That's essentially where the line is. Wherever you two together say, man, I'm serving and loving one another. This couple is fully indulging in their relationship as they pursue one another and they stay in love together. But today, the best chance for those of you who are dating or single is to make sure you are prioritizing pursuing purity as you pursue that other person. I think the lie that so many people believe is that, man, you know where great sex happens? Like, I just need to make sure that they are great at sex and then we'll have great sex together. And so it doesn't happen in marriage. It happens just kind of based on how they look or how good they are. And you've never had great sex. And you think you have, and right now you're like, oh, you don't know me, I totally have. And you have no idea what great sex is like. Great sex outside of the confines of marriage does not exist, and here's what I mean by that. Let me explain it like this. Anybody like acai bowls in here? Okay, Okay, 3 of you, good, awesome. This would be a great illustration. Somebody on my team was like, hey, we gotta go get acai bowls. It's gonna be great. And I was like, it was for lunch. And it was like, who gets acai? That's like soft serve for lunch. Why would we eat soft serve for lunch? And they were like, no, they're so great. Have you ever had an acai bowl? And I said, yes, I've had an acai bowl. And they say, where from? I said, Costco. And they said, oh, that's not an acai bowl. They call it an acai bowl, but it's insulting when you look at the picture. That's not what an acai bowl is. You've never actually had an acai bowl, even though you think you have. You've never actually had great sex, even if you think you have. Here's what I mean by that. Because outside of the confines of a secure covenant relationship, which is called marriage, it does not exist. And you may be like, no, it was really great, that one night stand that I had off Tinder. You're having Costco acai bowl. I want you to hear me really clear. You're having a Costco acai bowl. Why do I say that? Because you know how different it is in the context? Like sex is amazing in marriage. And it's not because it's like, oh, we're always swinging from the chandelier and every night's lingerie night. It's because you're in the context of a secure relationship with another person who's covenanted their life to you, saying, I'm not going anywhere, you're not going anywhere. I'm not putting out because I need you to stay. I'm giving myself to you because I love you in marriage and because no matter what, you won't leave. That's what marriage is. And there's a security, and if you're here and you're like, no, but it's so much greater, you're eating a Costco acai bowl, and I hope you believe me. Those Tinder one-night stands, those hookups from the guy off of Bumble, you are selling yourself short for a counterfeit. You're swimming in the shallow end, and it's a joke. And I feel bad for you because you think you have something that God says, I invented sex, I'm all about it, and I want you to experience levels of intimacy in your marriage that you cannot even dream of. And you've sold yourself short for a joke. And I don't care how much sex that you're having out there. Apart from experiencing sex on a physical, emotional, and spiritual level, you're eating the Costco bowl. And how tragic. And the God who's there, he hasn't given up on you. He's for you. He loves you. He wants you to experience intimacy in your marriage someday. But it's not gonna be experienced apart from you pursuing purity, pursuing God's way, honoring one another, covenanting together, and experiencing the design and the place for which he created that binding and blinding thing to take place. In conclusion, if you want to have a love that lasts, it'll always involve work. It's always going to involve serving the other person. And it's always going to involve sexually pursuing one another. God is so passionate, and I'll close here and we can bring the band up, and he's passionate about staying in love and this idea of couples staying together in love because God ultimately defines that marriage is all about him. He's the perfect picture of staying in love no matter what you face. So we're laying on the plane, listen to me. He's passionate about staying in love no matter what comes because that is what God is like. There's even a picture that we're given inside of the Bible of a guy named Hosea where God says, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna showcase to the world. You guys with me? It's a book of the Bible called Hosea. And in it he says, I'm gonna showcase to the world, I'm a God that no matter what my people do, no matter despite all the different ways that they fail, all the different ways that I should leave, I'm staying in love. I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm staying. He shows up to a guy named Hosea. He's a man, he lived. He was a prophet in the Old Testament. He shows up and God comes to him and he says, I want you to do me a favor, Hosea. I want you to go marry a prostitute. And we're told Hosea, doesn't respond like most of us would of like, come again? What? He says, okay. And I've already got her picked out. Her name is Gomer. And I want you to go marry her. And you're gonna have children with this prostitute. You're gonna marry her, and not only that, you're gonna have a child from her, and she's gonna have other children out of wedlock, because she's gonna cheat on you over and over and over. And he says, this will be a picture of what the people of God do to me when they chase after other gods and they break my heart and they go after other lovers and I never leave them. I stay in love no matter what comes and what I face, what is experienced or what they do. I stay in love. And you're gonna go do this. And we're told that Hosea, he goes and he marries Gomer and they have one son together. And not long after that, we're told that Gomer goes around town and she's sleeping around. And she comes home one day and she's pregnant. She's pregnant with a little baby girl, La Roma is what they name her. Which means God said, and he came to him and said, name her La Roma, which is not my people, because they've turned and gone after other gods. And Hosea is heartbroken, but he continues to love Gomer and he continues to care. And then we're told that one day she goes and again, she finds herself pregnant by another man. And God says, I want you to name him Lo Ami, not received mercy. Because my people, despite the fact that I want to give them mercy and I want them to know that I'm staying in love and I'm in relationship with them, they continue to run after other gods. And I want you to showcase the faithfulness of God, that I stay in love. And tragically, the book is heartbreaking. Hosea again goes after, and we're told shortly after, Hosea is there raising their 3 little kids. And Gomer goes again and she sleeps with another man, and it gets so bad she's sold into sex slavery and becomes the property of another man. And we're not told exactly, but for some reason, it's like Hosea was like, I can't move forward anymore with this. And God shows up and he says, go again, Hosea chapter 3, verse 1. Go again, Hosea. Go and love a woman who's the lover and being loved by a lover who's committing adultery. Just like the love of the Lord for the children of Israel, for the people of God, who look to other gods. That he shows up and he says, go again and love her, just like I love my people, despite the fact that every single day they make decisions where they turn and they worship success, they worship sex, they worship pornography, they worship a dating relationship, they worship whatever this world has to offer, and I never leave them because I stay in love and I pursue them. Go again, and we're told that he goes and he's in the middle of the city and he sees her and she's on an auction block being sold. He's like sitting there, he's going, that's my wife. That's my wife. And he goes up and the guy says, I don't care who she is. This is the price that she is. You can pay it or not. He doesn't have enough money, we're told. So he goes home and he gathers up some different things from around the house and he brings here's 15 shekels and here's some of the stuff that I have. Will you take it? Whatever the price, I'll pay it. Whatever the price, I'll pay it. And I'm staying in love. And God said, this is just like the love of the Lord for you. Every single sin that's represented inside of this room, every single dysfunctional relationship you've ever been a part of or are currently a part of, in every way that all of us have failed God, he's a God who says, no matter what comes, I'm staying in love. I care about my people being in marriages where they stay in love and they reflect the commitment that I have for them. Despite all the failures of their spouse, that I'm not going anywhere. And ultimately, the picture of Hosea and Gomer is a picture of Jesus towards you and towards me. He's a God who says, this covenant I will never break. I will never end, no matter what you do. I am staying in love. And I made that decision. He's a God who died in your place 2,000 years ago on a cross, and he made that ultimate commitment. And the covenant was sealed. No matter what you do, if you put your faith in Jesus, you enter into that relationship because you're Gomer and so am I. In every different ways that all of us this week sinned and rebelled against God and were selfish and self-seeking and angry and lustful and prideful, all of them he paid for and said, I'm staying in love and I'm paying whatever the price. She's mine, he's mine, they're mine. That's why God cares about staying in love. He's passionate about it. And our hope in this series is that you will learn and marriages will be formed of people who stay in love because they ultimately are in a relationship with the God who through Jesus has promised there's never a moment where he will not be staying in love with them. Let me pray. Father, God, I just want to pray for anyone in this room who's never stepped into a relationship with you, the most important relationship that they will ever have. Is their acceptance or begins with them accepting the free gift that you offered, where you extended the invitation to anyone who will accept it. I paid for everything wrong you've ever done, everything all over this room that is represented of the ways that all of us have sinned and fallen short of our standards, of other standards, and of your standard. And yet you said, despite all of that, you paid for it by dying in our place. Tonight, God, would you allow what the Spirit of God only can do, no message, no music, no person could do, to allow people to see you're a God who's offered the extension of that love, who stays in love, who's been pursuing every person in this room despite everything wrong, God. From the moment they took their first breath, and will be pursuing them till the moment they take their last. Father, I pray for dating relationships and marriages to form out of this room, and out of men and women inside of this room who know you and walk with you, and they would bring kids into this world who walk with you from an early age, who know you. I pray that you would prevent marriages that do not need to happen. Tonight, breakups would take place all over our country with those who are listening in. And I pray that you'd solidify relationships with people pursuing you, and they would feel like, despite all the craziness the world says, I can't believe you would date that way. They would feel just a confidence and a peace that comes from knowing that your way leads to life. Your ways are not our ways. They're higher, they're better, and they're for our good. And we can trust you, God. Help us to be more like Jesus. We need you, God. Take ground in all of our hearts. Start with me. We worship you now in song. Amen.